Smelter is a game that looks to blend action platforming with strategy resource management whilst wrapping this fusion of genres in a story that does some fusing of its own, taking Adam and Eve and throwing in a science fiction angle for good measure. Will this merging of styles lead to a winner, or is it going to blow a fuse? I'm Glen Bolger, thank you to the publishing team for the review code, and now let's find out. The story revolves around the destruction of the Garden of Eden when Adam tastes the forbidden fruit. The consequences of this act are that Adam is now missing and Eve has found herself in a strange land. She meets a creature named Smelter who merges with her, promising her power to help her find Adam in exchange for her help in return. So gameplay wise, Smelter is a hybrid of two different styles. It's split between 2D action platforming segments and top-down strategy resource management sections, most comparable to a tower defense game. Starting with the platforming sections then, and as Eve you'll make your way through each stage, with stages comprising of a number of different screens. It's very much an action platformer with a number of enemies present and getting hit draining your health bar, which is displayed at the top of the screen. Eve starts with a fairly basic moveset, but through finding forges in the various levels you will gain moves for your skill tree. The skill tree isn't your traditional type where you pick your path through it, you are basically just given the moves as you unlock them. These will see you wall climbing, double jumping and being able to perform combos, to name but a few. Aside from these moves, the main gameplay mechanic in these platforming sections relates to the Smelter character. Basically, this allows Eve to project a hand forward to grab onto certain surfaces or replenish health via the checkpoints scattered throughout the levels. It also allows you to do a special move called the Smelt Blade. Throughout the levels there are a number of collectibles to be found, and these will have a bearing on the strategy segments which we'll go through soon. First off, there are a set number of mining points, and destroying these will gain you a material named Moxes. Moxes can also be obtained by defeating enemies. Next there are apple cores, and finding and collecting these will allow you to upgrade your central hub within the overworld tower defense sections. Finally, and most interestingly, you have tokens which can be acquired by finding bonus rooms named trials. Finding one of these will give you an objective, such as getting to the end without being hit or being seen, and success will net you one of the aforementioned tokens. These are pretty difficult and may take a few tries. You can leave the trial if you want, and an area will open up on the overworld map that allows you to retry the trials at any point without having to navigate your way back to them via the level that you found them in. Let's look now at the strategy part of the game, and these take place after a platforming section has been completed. At these points you control Smelter, who must build up and command his army of Zerms against an invading threat. You will be given an objective such as occupying towers or destroying a wall, and must carry these out whilst being attacked. You can use the Moxie and tokens earned in the platforming levels as currency, and must build houses to increase your population, and then after building things such as barracks, assign the Zerms to such buildings. You must have enough houses to cover the size of your army, and must also build orchards so that you have enough apples to feed your army, basically making it all a balancing act of the types of buildings that you need. Players are in direct control of Smelter, and once the enemy begins to attack, as I said earlier, this resembles a tower defense game, and Smelter can attack the enemy himself by using the right stick, a bit like a twin stick shooter. Victory over the enemy will progress the story and more areas will open up, therefore leading to further platforming sections and so on. Finally, you have the runes at the end of the platforming levels, which will grant you different elemental powers, and new skill trees, each with their own moves, which can then be used in previous levels to reach areas that would have otherwise been inaccessible and may well contain more of the game's collectibles. The switching styles does work well, and it's spaced out in such a way that keeps things interesting. I'm sure many of you that have been gaming since at least the early 90s or have an appreciation for such time in gaming will be quite rightly comparing what you've just seen to a Super Nintendo game called ActRaiser, and yes, it does play quite similarly to that game, albeit the strategy sections are more tower defense than town builder. I didn't always feel the soldiers on the strategy sections were as proactive as they should have been, or on the flip side at other times they concerned themselves with enemies nowhere near their post, leaving buildings they were meant to be guarding exposed. There were also a lot of mechanics thrown at you at once, although to be fair the game does include a glossary of all of the terms, but even with this in mind though, I must say there were certain parts that aren't explained very well, and there was a particular section where I had to go through my saved footage to reread what I'd been asked to do because it wasn't as clear as it should have been. In terms of the controls, and starting with the platform sections, Eve herself feels quite heavy, to the point where when jumping it almost feels as if you are descending before you have even reached the apex of your jump. It's not necessarily bad, but it definitely does take some getting used to and feels quite awkward initially as a result. It just doesn't have the fluidity that you might expect from a character with such a vast array of moves. The overworld sections are fairly straightforward. Clicking on an area of land will bring up the menu of available buildings. Smelter can repair buildings when they are under attack by pressing the R button, and as I mentioned, you can attack yourself by using the right stick. There are a few fiddly moments initially as you need to remember to assign soldiers to particular buildings, but it does begin to become second nature. Gameplay is an interesting blend of platforming and strategy, and whilst the tower defense part was weaker in my opinion, they complemented each other well enough in the context of the game, and it scores 15 out of 20. Controls aren't detrimental to the experience, but Eve's movement is definitely heavier than your average platform protagonist, which does take a small period of acclimatization. They score 14 out of 20. In terms of the visuals, Smelter uses a pixel art style and has a very distinct 16-bit look, reminding me of games such as Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo. There are a nice variety of backgrounds as you visit different lands, not just in terms of the colour palette used, but also in terms of the smaller details present as you move through the levels. There is a vibrancy in play in terms of the bright greens of Smelter's powers and the blues and oranges of the Moxie's, set against the more muted tones of the world that is built. The overworld sections push further towards this vibrancy with strong greens and purples on show. On a personal level, I didn't think the bold black outlines around some of the character sprites worked quite so well, making them look almost superimposed against the backdrops. As well as the pixel art, a beautiful animated cutscene plays right at the beginning of the game, and it's a shame that this style wasn't implemented more often, even if it had just been for the character portraits, which do look a bit too pixelated in my opinion. Performance wise, whilst things run well for the most part, I did experience a few stutters at times, mainly on the tower defense segments, and not even necessarily when the screen was overly busy. These stutters were also occasionally present in the platforming sections, although not as often. Audio wise, music is upbeat and dynamic, lending itself very well to the action-packed nature of the game. There is no voice acting in the game, which is a shame as the writing is fairly witty, and it would have been nice to see it fully brought to life. Visuals use pixel art to good effect, apart from a couple of minor missteps, and score 15 out of 20. Audio is a good match for what is present on screen and scores 16 out of 20. Smelter costs £15.09 and regional equivalents are on your screen now. The game has a fairly large map to traverse, with new areas unlocking through progress in the tower defense sections and new platforming levels opening up as a result. In my opinion, for this to truly be a worthy purchase, you need to be fully on board with the hybrid nature of the game. What I mean by this is that if you are mainly interested in the platforming, well, the tower defense sections will slow down your progress in this respect, and if it's the tower defense element that intrigues you, it is the weakest part of the game in all honesty. Only those that are looking for the fusion of the two will get maximum money's worth. Production values also need to be taken into consideration though, and the game definitely looks incredibly polished. Value scores 14 out of 20. To conclude, Smelter does a good job of fusing two different genres together. Its platforming sections are action packed with a host of enemies to defeat, new moves to learn and obstacles to overcome. They present a good challenge and are fun to play. The strategy, tower defense parts aren't quite as refined, but were still quite enjoyable in their own right, plus most importantly, the two feed into one another seamlessly. It's not perfect and you'll need to be on board with the concept to enjoy it to its fullest, but if you are such a person, then you could do a lot worse. Smelter gets a SwitchUp score of 74%. Thank you everybody for watching this review, I hope you enjoyed it. Please do remember to leave a like if you did. A quick thank you to our Patreons as always for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. We've had a good number of new subscribers recently, which is fantastic, thank you very much. With that said, take care, stay safe, and until next time, happy gaming.